What is going on, everyone? Here we have our preview for the final round of the Farmers Insurance Open on a Saturday rather than a Sunday. Of course, placement points, a much bigger part of the process for DFS and for large field contests, as opposed to some of your cash contests, going to be huge differences in your lineup construction as well. So, with a lot to talk about, let's hop right on into it so we don't have much time to waste here at all. First off, with some of the weather, going to look much as it did the last 3 days. Pretty calm conditions in the morning, 4 to 5 miles an hour. You can see out here towards 10, still 4 to 5 miles an hour winds. And then in the afternoon, kicking up slightly a little bit more. You can see 7 mile an hour wind sustained, up to 12 mile an hour gusts, and out towards 5. Kind of calms down a little bit again, right? 6 to 10 miles an hour. So in general, slightly more wind in the afternoon than we've seen in some of these past few days, but I don't expect it to make that much of an impact. Let me go ahead and show you why. First and foremost, the course played much quote unquote easier yesterday. And I saw a lot of people on Twitter talking about this. A lot of it is due to the talent gap, right? I talked about it yesterday. We have the better players still in the field. Majority of the guys at the top of the betting board ended up making the cut this week. That's why we had such a high 6 of 6 percentage when it came to some of these DFS contests. That's why it was near 10 to 15% this week rather than some weeks where it's 2 to 3%. When we have guys at the top of the betting board that end up missing the cut, not only do we have a relatively we'll see weaker field, you're also dealing with just higher scoring averages, right? Over the weekend, those players a little bit more likely to progress. Also kind of had to do with the conditions, right? They were relatively stagnant yesterday, not much wind at all. A little bit more wind today, again, especially towards the afternoon when we have this 7 to 12 mile an hour gap from, let's say, right around 1 to 3 p.m. is where you have that. You can see still 12 miles an hour here at 1 p.m. But I don't expect that to push it over par. You should still see this thing playing under par. This should be surprising to a lot of you because I think a lot of you would have expected this to be over par with how John Rahm and Justin Thomas played. But everyone else in the field was taking this place apart. So I expect a lot of regression from those guys up top. I mean, we're going to talk about the player pool here in a second. Let's look at the hole-by-hole breakdown. You can see the par fives were significantly under par. First off, this one right here. Where's the other? Yeah, only 0.14 over here for the 615-yard par 5, but understandable. But even 18, which is a Goliath, was playing nearly 600 yards yesterday. Was still a third of a stroke under par, still a quarter of a stroke under par. This one is 621 yards. So even though it's an extremely long golf course, the fairways are running out, which means that even, I don't want to say the shortest hitters in this field are able to reach these in 2, but the average hitters are able to reach these par 5s in 2. So that's why we see the scoring average, at least yesterday, where it was. Let's move over to the player pool because, again, we have a lot to talk about. Hey, what's going on, Ed? Absolutely. Let's have a great little Saturday/Sunday showdown. Not really sure what to call it here at this point. Bringing up the projections for y'all. Here we go. So as always, we have the price and score over here. Of course, score extremely important this week when we're considering placement points. And the projected points this week are taking into account their placement position. So obviously, no guarantees, right? It's not like somebody has a 5-stroke lead. So we're not baking in 20 fantasy points to anybody. But somebody like a John Rahm, for example, is getting right around an 8-point boost just based on his position on the board alone. So I would expect him to have the highest win equity. I think the Vegas bookmakers have reflected that with their odds here at this point. But that's why he's getting the most boost. But in the rest of the field, you're getting boosts anywhere between, let's say, 3 to 5, maybe 7 to 8 points for some of the upper end guys throughout the field. Ownership over here, it's also reflective of the placement points. Of course, when we're dealing with Showdown, particularly for a round 4 Showdown, people love taking the guys at the top of the board. Of course, you're getting a little bit more of that win equity, but are also in form, right? So it makes a whole lot of sense. We're going to be wanting to play a lot of the chalk, but we're also going to have to pivot off some of it, right? We're going to have to get unique somewhere. We can't be taking chalk at all 6 of our positions. And week in and week out, you see it. At least 2 to 3 of those guys up top end up slipping, if not more, right? Typically by the end of Sunday, there's at least 3 to 4 guys that were, let's say, 5 to 6 strokes back that ended up cracking that top 5. And those are the guys that you need to be optimal in a large field GPP, okay? It's not the guys that are out there 1 stroke off the lead and shoot 2 under today that end up finishing 10th place. Those guys are useless, okay? We're trying to target the guys who can actually score at this golf course. That's a question I get all the time is, should I be trying to jam in all these guys up top? only if you think they're actually going to go out and have a good round. You said you had a bad day of golf yesterday. Hey, it's a new day, right? If you didn't have Will Zalatoris, didn't have some of those guys that shot 6-7 under yesterday, it was pretty rough because John Rahm had a bad day, right? Justin Thomas also had a bad day. So a lot of landmines for sure. So I think I mentioned like the potentially starting in the 9K range. Yeah, that's what you had to do to be optimal yesterday. You had to play Zalatoris, like Scotty Scheffler, those type of guys, and leave a little bit of salary on the table. Those are the lineups that ended up taking stuff down yesterday. You said, let's ready to eat today. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like I said, new day, new dollars to be made. Um, yeah, let's get into it because, again, we have a lot to talk about here in terms of strategy. So we're just going to go down the board in terms of what I have them on here. There's going to be some guys that are near the top of the leaderboard, guys towards the bottom. We'll talk about some of the priorities. So I think we need to obviously hit on John Rahm, who is an excellent play today, but it's the same exact story as yesterday, right? He's 50% owned. You either have to lock him or you have to take a stand and take under on him. So I'm going to be right around 40% in my GPP type of lineups. I'm going to be playing 20 lineups today. So I'm looking at taking him about 6 to 7 of my lineups. I think that he could very well go out there, shoot 6-7 under par today, go out, win this golf tournament. Would not surprise me. So I'm not going to advise against locking him. I think it makes a whole lot of sense if you're in that boat, if you're somebody who thinks he wins this golf tournament. That's how you should be handling your showdown today because he's going to be 50% owned, if not higher. Would not surprise me to see him eclipse that 60% mark that we saw him on Friday. You guys remember at the North Course, that's the type of ownership that he saw. But I can't advise against that. I'm personally going to have 35% because, again, week in and week out, we see some of those guys up top slip. We saw them slip yesterday. And the guys that are 3-4 strokes back, even if they don't end up winning the golf tournament, if they end up scoring an extra birdie or two, that's usually enough to end up scoring higher. So that's just how it works with Showdown. People put a little bit too much emphasis on the placement points because the fact of the matter is if somebody's finishing third place versus fourth place, that's 2 points difference in placement points. If the guy behind him by one stroke ends up making one more birdie, that's more than enough to make up for that. He ends up beating him by 3.5 points. So there's just, again, too much emphasis is put on this placement points at times, but I still like John Rahm today. Still like Justin Thomas as well. Both of them looked rough yesterday. I have him at only 18.9%. If this ends up being accurate, he probably should come in a little bit higher than that. I can't see him coming in less than 20%. But again, there's priorities in this 9K range, priorities in the 8K range as well. Obviously, a lot of people are trying to take John Rahm. So if Justin Thomas is slightly overlooked, would make for a great tournament pivot. So he will be in my player pool, at least for right now, when I have him at 18.9%. Dustin Johnson at even lower ownership. He's also a few strokes back. But again, if he goes out there, he shoots 6 under today, that kind of thing. That could very well end up optimal without winning this whole golf tournament. So I like him there. I have him projected for 51.46 points. So you can see he has a little bit of that placement point share and a great course fit here. And he started to look more and more sharp as the week has gone on. The guy hadn't played golf for like 2-3 months before playing this week. So the fact that he's looked as sharp as he has is impressive enough. So I have an outright ticket on him. If he ends up bringing it home today, that would be awesome for me. We have Xander Schauffele here. Let's talk about some of the fades I have here. Xander Schauffele is more of a fade just because of his placement position here, right? He's at a score of -5. I see there's a question here about a prop we'll touch on. Mr. Debo says, do you like Xander Schauffele under greens in regulation? Probably not under, no. I'd probably be taking the over there. This is a golf course that he's very familiar with. He's looked better and better as the week went on. He looked really bad day 2. He looked really good day 1, really bad day 2. Kind of turned it back around here on Saturday. I'm not sure you have to let me know the number on that. So I don't know that off the top of my head. I wouldn't be fading him, if that makes sense, right? I think that he's going to have at least a decent day today. But for DFS purposes, right, for Draftkings purposes, he's just starting a little bit too far back. So I'm not going to be taking him at $9,500. Daniel Berger was injured yesterday. If you're going to be taking any props on Daniel Berger, you should probably be fading them today. In DFS, you probably don't want to be touching Daniel Berger. He was grabbing his back after at least the first 5 shots of yesterday, especially all the tee shots. He would hit the tee shot, grab his back. And granted, by the end of the day, he ended up 3 under, ended up having a really solid day. I don't think we can expect that to happen again if the guy's grabbing his back, right? Most of the time when guys are in that situation, they're shooting well over par. Usually don't have as much boom off the bat, right? They don't have much pop in the bat. And that's an issue for Daniel Berger. He's already one of the short hitters on tour. And you said the line's 12. Yeah, I'd take the over on that, man. I don't think I'd go under. Yeah, I think he's going to have a pretty decent day. He's from the area. He's not in a bad position on the leaderboard. He believe he shot 3 under yesterday. And to get to 3 under, you got to hit more than 12 greens at this golf course. So I don't hate that. I'm not sure what he ended up doing yesterday. I'm assuming he hit the over. He had an excellent day with his ball striking. Let's keep going a little bit further down. Sungjae and Will Zalatoris are chalk that I'll be eating. Willie Z looks like he's a man on a mission right now to win his first ever tour event. He's somebody who I don't have any money behind this week, but I'm hoping he wins. He deserves to win. He's been due for a long time now. He's a perfect course fit here, right? We said that at the beginning of the week. That's why he was chalk going into this week. Long hitter off the tee, great with his long irons. The issue is the putting, right? And historically, you can see he wasn't the best putter on Poa Anua, but didn't have much of a sample size, right? And that's something that was kind of an unknown going into this week. And it seems like he's a pretty damn good putter on Poa Anua. The guy is an aggressive putter by trait. I said that about Justin Thomas. Some of those guys that are not afraid to roll the ball past the hole tend to make a lot more putts on Poa Anua. It's unexplainable. I can't tell you why, but it happens. It's a trend that we've seen. So for Will Zalatoris, 14 under par, I'll be all over him. Again, he's going to be chalk. I have him at 37.8%. But I'm going to have more than that. I'm probably going to have 60, 70% in my lineups because he's somebody I do think has a great day today. So he's probably my biggest stand on the slate. I mean, I'm going to have plenty of John Rahm, but in terms of a leverage standpoint, Will Zalatoris, because he's only at 37%, definitely takes that home. Sungjae M, also a decent pick here. I don't love the putting on Poa Anua. I don't love the fact that he's been so accurate to this point because he's due for some regression at some point. I mean, the guy's been he hasn't had to rely on the around the green game like pretty much everyone else in the field. And when that happens, it's not going to be pretty for Sungjae. So I'm going to be taking him, but it's with a little bit of caution. Just knowing that he's looked hairy the last 2-3 months, right? He's normally had 1 or 2 rounds in these events where he's completely fallen off the rails. And we haven't seen that for Sungjae M, which, hopefully he keeps it together. If he can, he's going to thread that top 5 or even potentially win this golf tournament with a great round. That's why he's in my player pool. That's why I'm going to have over the field on Sungjae M today. But I would not be surprised if he went out there and had a stinker. He's done it the last 2-3 events. And typically that's when I play him in Showdown. It's when he goes out and has that round. Strictly Money says, how would you attack a 5-person winner take all? So that would be more like a cash contest, right? If it's a winner take all, there's only 5 people in it. You're looking for a top 20th percentile performance. You don't need a top 5. You don't need a top 1 percentile performance. So in that type of thing, it's more of a cash build. You'd want to take a John Rahm. You'd want to take just the guys that are projecting for the highest points per dollar, right? So we look on here to see who some of those people would be. At the top of the board, of course, it's John Rahm, 5.7x value. Down here, Maverick McNeely at nearly 5x value. I know we haven't gotten to him yet, but he's going to be a great value play. You can look to somebody like Will Zalatoris, 5.5x. See this points per dollar right here? Just take the guys that have the highest metric right there. Those are the guys that are going to be projecting for the most points. That's how I would attack cash contests and any type of multiplier or contests like that where you're just looking for like a top 20th percentile, top 33rd, or top 50th percentile type of performance. All right, so really do like Sungjae M, do like Will Zalatoris, as we just said. Down here, this is a little bit of a dead range. You can see, guys like Taylor Gooch, Reed, Wolf, Zaynhoot, starting too far back, not the greatest course fits to begin with. So unless they go out there, shoot 7-8 under par today, I'm not going to be optimal. And I'd be much more willing to take those shots with cheaper players, right? People that are in the mid 6K range or even the lower 6K range, that it doesn't really matter their placement points, right? They're at the 6K range anyways. They go out, make 7-8 birdies. That is going to be enough to make them optimal, let alone where they end up on the leaderboard. Guys like Maverick McNeely and Ryan Palmer, though, some of my favorite plays on the slate, specifically Maverick McNeely, who was a core play for me going into the week. Of course, great course fit. That's why he was a core pick for us. He's at $8,400. That's very fair for his position on the leaderboard. He looked great yesterday. I know a lot of people that were fading his lines, and frankly, I didn't really understand it. I wasn't going to give people too much pushback. But yeah, it was a mistake, right? This is a guy who's extremely comfortable over here on the West Coast. Great putter on Poa Anua. So I'm going to be riding him once again here. He's 3 strokes off the lead. So if he goes out there, has an immaculate day, could actually win this golf tournament. So same thing with Ryan Palmer. It's also why he's a priority for me. Also, similar things can be said about his course fit with Maverick McNeely. Decent putter in Poa. You can see not quite as prolific as somebody like Maverick Neely, but at least a positive there. But great off the tee, somebody who can get it out there with his distance as well. Let's move on a little bit further. We're not going to touch on everyone on this field. If there's anybody that I'm skipping, guys, and you want me to touch on, do not be shy. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments. I'll be free to touch on them. What is going on, man? Hopefully you're doing well this morning. So my projections have been on point. Glad to hear that, man. Hopefully today you can take something down. That'd be pretty sweet. Let me know how many lineups you're playing. Today I'm playing 20, by the way. Not playing 150. I might ramp that up to 50. We'll have to see. After I get off here, if we have enough room in some of these GPPs, I'm sure I'll probably end up adding a few entries as always. I'm always, one, if they see a little bit of overlay in those GPPs, I'm always willing to get a little bit more exposure. So we'll have to see what it looks like after I get off here. Jason Day at 14 under, guys, is going to be chalk, but honestly, he's a great course fit, right? He was somebody we were playing going into the week. I saw people out there betting him outright, which this is going to be a hell of a day for those people out there. And there was a good amount of them on Twitter that bet Jason Day this week. So first off, I guess if he won, I would be pretty happy for those people. So I wouldn't be too mad about it, but great course fit, right? He's still long off the tee. He's won at the Farmers Insurance before. He's competed at the US Open here. Really impressed. He's $7,900. He's in first place. Great on Poa Nua for his career. One of the best long iron players of all time. I don't think there's anything you can say bad about this, right? The health is the one X factor, but he's looked super healthy this week. He looks like he's walking around like his old 20-year-old self. If you've heard him in his interviews, he's saying that he's felt the best that he's ever felt before. And like he said, ever before, not like, oh, the best I felt in like a few years. He said he feels like he did like when he was in his prime. And I think that's a little bit overblown. He's clearly probably using a little bit of hyperbole there. But at the same time, it's great news, right? If he's 80% of that, he could very well end up closing this golf tournament because this guy was the number one player in the world at some point. I think a lot of people forget that. Great course fit here. I'm going to be all over him. He's $7,900. I think it's a fair price tag. He's going to be chalky. But much like Will Zalatoris, I'm looking again 60, 70%, right? He's going to be in about 2/3 of my lineups. He's a cornerstone value that a lot of the field's going to be getting to, and you could even lock today, and I would not be against it. We have a little bit of a dead zone here as well. You can see pretty much the whole way from Johnny Vegas, the whole way down to Patrick Rogers. Not people I'm actively looking to play. A lot of them in that mid, let's say 5-6 under par range, which is much too far back to really make any type of impact on the leaderboard. And all not the best course fits, right? I guess Patrick Rogers, if you were going to take a shot on somebody down low, you could do that. The issue is he's $7,400, right? He's not cheap. He's not in that mid 6K range. That's why I'm really fading a lot of the guys here, right? Because I'd rather take a lot of those shots down low. Somebody you don't have to take a shot on is Aaron Rai at $7,500. He's minus 13. He's one shot off the lead. Very impressive. We didn't really know much about his game. He's somebody who on the European tour would compete from time to time, ended up coming through for a win before coming over and actually graduating on the Corn Ferry Tour. So he did all that in very short succession. That's why people were really high on Aaron Rai. It's hard to go out, win a golf tournament, immediately come over to the United States, get your card for the Corn Ferry Tour just like right away. Pretty much no pushback at all. We didn't know much about his game, but it seems first off that he's relatively long. He's getting it out there about 315 to 320 yards from what we've seen. He's also looks like a really good iron player. It looks like somebody who with his long irons, I don't know who his comp would be. I can't really think of one off the top of my head. Maybe like a Billy Horschel's irons, right? Where it's like not elite, but it's well above average, especially with their long irons. Even though Billy Horschel isn't the longest player, he's still relatively accurate with those. So I think that would be a good comp for him, but the putting's bad, right? Typically, you can just tell with his form, he does not look like he's a very sound putter, not a very technical putter. You can see for his career, the rounds that we have, he's a loser on Poa Nua. But ball strikers at Torrey Pines, that's what we're looking for, right? If we go over to the key stats, just to remind you guys, shots gained off the tee, shots gained approach, 1 and 2. So I'm willing to forgive and forget with that. I think he has a relatively high floor. If you're playing cash contests, a 5-man contest, multipliers, anything like that, him and Jason Day are pretty much must-owns. I think you should have all of them in pretty much every lineup that you have. Renz is in here and says, what is going on? Hopefully you're doing well this morning. Let's move on a little bit further down. A little bit of a dead zone here as well. You'll see Doug Gim. Poor guy didn't have the best round yesterday. Poor guy. He's at least a decent course fit. So if you want to go back to him, I can understand it. He's a really high upside play. He's highly volatile, going to make a ton of birdies when he's on. But when he's off, he's going to have a day like yesterday where he shoots over a par. So I can see for his career, a gainer on Poa Anua, which if you know anything about Doug Gim, that should surprise the hell out of you. He's a major loser on all three major grass types other than Poa Anua. A little bit further down, guys that I do like, guys I'll be rostering quite a bit of. Taylor Pendrith, he's starting at 10 under par. That is 4 strokes off the lead. But if he goes out there today and shoots 4 or 5 under par, that might not win the golf tournament. But if he finishes in the top 3 and has 4 or 5 birdies on the card, that is going to be optimal. So I will be going back to him. Very long off the tee, very good iron player. He's historically a good putter. You can see on Poa Nua, hasn't really shown that to this point of his career, but that is also with a really small sample size. My throat was starting to get really dry there. Sorry about that, guys. I'll remind you, if there's anybody you want me to do a deep dive on, go through the shots gain metrics, give you my take on, go ahead and let me know down in the chat. We're going to do quite a bit of skipping around now that we're in the value range. So next up, we have Cameron Young. The guy shot 10 under yesterday. Not 10 under. He shot a 64. He shot 8 under yesterday on the South course, where I believe it was the best round by 3 or 4 strokes yesterday. He's $7,000. The pricing came out before he really had that charge on his final 9. He's long off the tee, great iron player. We targeted him last week, ended up being I believe after 36 rounds, he was either in the lead or 1 off the lead. I did not expect him to come to Torrey Pines and continue that type of form, and he has. Incredible player. He's from the Korn Ferry Tour. Everyone in the Korn Ferry Tour that's played with him is just completely blown away by his distance. I mean, this is a guy who's getting it out there 320, 330 yards, like on average. He's probably going to be a top 5 distance player on tour this year. Granted that he keeps his card, is able to play in a lot of these events and whatnot. Look for him to have a very strong end to the weekend. I have him at single-digit ownership, much lower than a lot of the other chalk that's towards the top of the leaderboard. And it's really just the 1 or 2 stroke difference, right? If he was 13 under par, Cameron Young right now would be like 30, 40% owned. The fact that he's 2 strokes behind is keeping his ownership 3 to 4 times lower. And again, if he goes out there and outscores them by 1, 2 birdies, 2 would definitely get it done, but 1 birdie even, he could end up passing them in terms of their actual score. That's how important birdies are here. So he's an intriguing option, particularly at low ownership. Same thing with Pat Perez. He's, at -9, single digits under par, but that's only 2 strokes off of where we have people like Young, right? Thing is, he's $6,700. Pat Perez worked at Torrey Pines growing up. Like, this was like his childhood job. He used to pick the range here. He worked there as a marshal for quite some time, would work the Farmers Insurance Open as a volunteer growing up. His dad is the announcer here, the first tee announcer, whatever the hell they call it, the starter. He does that. Pat Perez loves this golf course. He's played it a million times, and he always plays well here, despite being a short hitter, right? This is a golf course where you almost have to be long, but Pat Perez always plays well here, and it's pretty obvious why. I mean, the guy grew up playing this golf course. He knows it like the back of his thumb. We've seen him play well here this week as well. I'm willing to ride that form. If he goes out there and has the round of his life, shoots 6, 7 under par, 8 under par like a Cameron Young had yesterday, he could threaten that top 3, that even win this golf tournament. Hell, if the leaders go out there and do what they did yesterday, he could win this golf tournament. So I don't think that's going to happen, but he's a great putter in Poa Nua. He clearly likes the ball striking at this golf course. For Showdown, that's exactly the kind of guy I want to take a risk on, particularly at low ownership, right? It's coming in at 3.7%, essentially being completely overlooked. Peter Malnati and Sepp Straka are starting at 10 under par. Similar story, particularly with Sepp Straka, relatively cheap like a Pat Perez, starting a little bit further back, but he is a volatile player, somebody that'll go out there and make a ton of birdies. So if he goes out there and makes 5 or 6, even if he doesn't finish in the top 5, could crack the optimal lineup, particularly because he's only $6,300. I do expect him to get some ownership. You can see he's higher owned than somebody like a Pat Perez there at 8.4%, but I'll have him. Peter Malnati's expensive now. He's $7,600. Been playing way over his head this week. So I'm going to have a little bit of him in case he rides that form, but I don't really understand it, right? He's a short hitter off the tee. He's not the best iron player. The fact that Peter Malnati is playing as well as he is right now is a little bit of an enigma to begin with, but who the hell knows? Maybe he rides that form, rides that heater throughout one more day. He's ridden it 3 days to this point, right? So one more really wouldn't be all that far-fetched. All right, so we went the whole way through the player poll. Now it's time to talk a little bit of strategy. We're going to go through first off GPP strategy, and then we'll finish it up with some cash strategy. And then after that, we'll go over your questions. So if there's any questions down in chat, go ahead and throw them down there now. And when we finish up with the strategy, we'll get to all the questions. So first off, strategy for large field GPPs. We know today that there's going to be a ton of ownership centered around, let's say, 4 to 5 guys. So let's go ahead and identify the quote unquote chalk. It's going to be Jon Rahm, 50% here. You have Will Zalatoris here at about 40%. You can make an argument that Sungjae Im may also crack the 30% mark down here. We have guys like Jason Day that is clearly going to be chalk. Potential chalk also in people, let's see, like a Siwoo Kim, right? You can talk about potentially going to somebody like a Cameron Chingale. He's 2 strokes off the lead. He could crack 25, 30%. Aaron Rai shouldn't be quite chalk. He's not going to be 30, 40% owned, but should crack the 25% mark. And that's about it, right? About those 5 to 6 players going to be the chalk players. I wouldn't be taking more than 3 of them in the same lineup. That's going to be how I'm doing my rules on Fantasy Cruncher. If you're using that website, if you're using your own optimizer, setting rules to make sure you're only taking 3 at most, probably the best idea. That way, you're making sure that you're going to keep your global ownership for your lineup was likely below 100%. If you're using an optimizer that does it that way, you're not able to set groups. I would set your max ownership percentage at 100%. Import, if you have access to the Patreon, import all these ownership projections and then use them to stay under 100%. That'd be a good way to tackle a GPP. You can, of course, just use these projections, run median projections on them, and honestly, that's what I'm doing for my set of 150. I'm going to be setting exposure caps, obviously, to make sure that I'm getting the type of lineups that I'm looking for. But that's going to be my strategy for today in GPPs, right? It's not going to be anything crazy. Few pivot points, I guess we'll go ahead and review on because I see that not everyone was here at the beginning. First and foremost, you can see that Maverick McNeely, Ryan Palmer, going to be those like middle tier, slightly lower owned plays that I'm going to. They might come in a little bit higher owned than 10 and 8%. Would not be surprised if both came in closer to 15%, but compared to their counterparts, people in this 9K range close to 30, 35%, or even a little bit cheaper, like a Luke List, like a Cameron Tringale, they're going to be 25, 30% owned. They're quote unquote pivots on this slate, right? In most slates, we wouldn't consider them pivots, but they're going to be ways that I make my lineup slightly more unique. Towards the bottom, again, I'm willing to take a few more risk in this 6K range. There's guys that I have down as blanks that I may have in 1 or 2 lineups. Guys that would fit that mold would be a Chad Ramey. He's a great course fit here. He's an extremely good off the tee player, very solid approach player. He's at 5 under par, but it would not surprise me if someone like him went out, shot 7 or 8 under today, like Cameron Young did yesterday. So guys that I have down as a blank are people that I'm not actively going to get leverage on, but probably going to have in a few lineups here and there, right? They're kind of like the flyers, the filler picks in my lineups because I am going to play 150, at least in the cheap stakes today. For my higher stakes, I'm only going to be playing the 20 lineups. But for my cheap stakes stuff where I'm just putting out a huge net of 150 lineups, that's how I'd be attacking that. These guys would be more like the filler plays. The no's are going to be guys that I'm actively fading in large field contests. So if you're in a 150 max, the guys that I would be quote unquote excluding from my player pool, the guys with an N, the guys with a Y are guys that I'm either at least matching the field on or getting leverage on, right? With Jon Rahm, he's one of the cases where I'm probably at least getting close to matching the field. Whereas guys like a Justin Thomas, a Dustin Johnson, Sungjae, Will Zalatoris, as we touched on before, I'm actively looking to get quite a bit of leverage on these guys. All right, let's talk about cash now. Like I mentioned a little bit towards the beginning, we'll touch on this once again, though. The main goal of cash is to first off capture the highest points per dollar upside. So this points per dollar category right here, G, is going to be what we're looking at, right? The guys with the highest PBD, best cash plays. But on top of that, we're also looking to get the highest amount of ownership. Ownership is a positive thing when it comes to cash. We're looking to eliminate as many of the roster spots as possible. And by taking the 80, 90% owned people in cash, it is exactly what we are doing in theory. So with Jon Rahm here, he's going to be like 80, 90, maybe even 95% owned in some of these cash contests. The more expensive the entry you're in, the more owned Jon Rahm's going to be. So you should probably end up locking him there. Would make a whole lot of sense. The next man in would probably be a Will Zalatoris. Again, we mentioned it before. He's the second highest points per dollar of any of these stud tier guys. So it's $9,700 would make a whole lot of sense. Jason Day is pretty much a no-brainer play on cash. He's starting in the lead. He's only $7,900. You go a little bit further down the board now, you're probably going to be able to take another stud. So we'll end up going towards the top. Talk about who you could use as that third stud guy. Aaron Rye would make a whole lot of sense at $7,500. Sepp Straka at $6,300. We'll go down there in a second. He could also be a relatively good cash play. Taylor Pendrith. I probably wouldn't use Cameron Young in cash. He's a little bit volatile. But yeah, down here, right, Sepp Straka, $6,300. In terms of points per dollar, I see 5.2x. There's no one else in this range even stiffing that type of points per dollar projection because he's getting a lot of those built-in placement points, right? If he goes out there, shoots 3 under today, he's at the very least getting right around 10 placement points. Or actually, not right around 7 or 8 placement points. I forgot. It's not 30. It's down to 20 for first place for Sunday Showdown, as opposed to 4-round stuff where it's a full 30 points. So that's how I would be handling cash. For the most part, right? Not doing anything cute. When you're in cash, just take what the chalk's doing. If you're running on an optimizer, just import your projected points, just run a lineup, and whatever lineup comes up, the optimal lineup that your cruncher is going to give you, that's what I would be running. If I ran it, I guarantee you it's going to be giving you John Rahm, Zalatoris, guys like Sepp Straka, mixing in some of the other points per dollar high plays as well. So you may leave salary on the board. You may not in cash. I really wouldn't make it a priority either way. So what we'll do now is we'll hop over to some of these questions down in chat. So JR says, your favorite GPP player, $6,700 or less. So in a GPP, it depends on whether you need to be unique or not, right? If you just need the highest points per dollar play on the board, Pat Perez, probably both options, right? Again, I have him projected for quite a few points down there. Sepp Straka would be the other option. If you're trying to leave a little bit of salary on the board, you could go his way as well. Barry says, give me some Woodland. Yeah, he's one of those guys that I have down as a blank, right? I don't have down as somebody that I'm actively fading. Would not surprise me if he went out there and had a really solid day. So completely agree with you there. And yeah, Champ to the bank. I had a bunch of Champ yesterday. Champ ended up having a bunch of birdies on the board. I believe he shot 1 under by the end of the day with 4 or 5 birdies. It wasn't optimal for GPPs, but he wasn't actively hurting my lineups either. I would be opposed to going back to him, right? He's long off the tee and he's hitting like 9 irons into every green. It's blowing my mind. Like even on some of these 500-yard par 4s, Cameron Champ's hitting it like 340 off the tee and having 160 in, which for him is like a 9 iron or a pitching wedge. It would be like a 9 iron for me. So yeah, it's a pitching wedge at the very most for Cameron Champ. So yeah, that's nuts, Barry. I like him for that reason. The issue is he's volatile, right? Cameron Champ's going to have plenty of rounds where he's doesn't have his game. He's going to be spraying it left and right. But for Showdown and large field GPPs, completely agree. So he said, if projected ownership is at 50%, what would you set exposure rate at? It depends player to player, right? Depends if you actually want to be eating that ownership or not, right? If you're fading, 0%, right? If you want to be a little bit under the field, 35. Or if you want to lock them, go ahead and lock them, right? So that's depends on the player, man. There's no cookie cutter answer to that question there. Can you repeat the 3 players you said should be grouped as far as high owned? So yeah, for cash contests, that's John Rahm. Will Zalatoris would definitely be the number 2. And then one of these other guys up top, right? So somebody in this stud tier range that you can afford. If you have enough for Dustin Johnson, go ahead and take him. More than likely, you're taking somebody like a Sungjae Im or a Maverick McNeely here in this $8,400 range. That's also starting towards the top of the leaderboard, good course fit, and a high points per dollar play. You can see near their 5x value for somebody like a McNeely, Sungjae Im, 5.13x, right? So that's what I meant when I said that. He says, for GPP, you don't want high-owned plays for GPP, man. I think you must have misheard me or if you're misunderstood with that. But GPPs, you want at the very most to be taking 3 guys that are chalk this week. And I gave a list of like 6 to 7 guys. So I know you have access to the Patreon there. So anybody that's over like 25% owned would fall into that category. I wouldn't have more than 3 of those players. So it's not at least 3. You can only take 2 of them if you want. I don't think you have to jam in the chalk. But I wouldn't be jamming in more than 3 of them. That's how I'm going to be handling it. That way, you're going to stay below 100% global ownership. Cool, sweet, glad you got it. Because that's how you should be handling, especially 150 maxes. That's more of a 150 max type of question. If you're 20 maxing and you really want to go ahead and lock in John Rahm, I have no problems with that. I completely, especially if you're in a single entry, a 3 max, single entry clearly, right? We have 1 fucking lineup. What am I saying? All right, let's go over to Draftkings. Let's make a few lineups. If you guys have any other questions, we can touch on them. So do not be afraid to throw them down in chat. Let me go ahead and bring up Draftkings over here. All right, bet. All right, let me share my screen for you guys. And we're just going to make a couple lineups here. First GPP lineup, maybe a few cash lineups. If there's any questions at the end, we'll touch on them and we'll get out of here. So first off, let's start with a GPP type of build. So like I said before, we're going to try and take some of the chalk up top, but we're also going to have to differentiate. I said before, I love Will Zalatoris, one of my favorite players in the slate. Also said that Jason Day, both starting at the top of the board. I don't think you need to differentiate. I think both make a whole lot of sense. We just have to keep in mind that both of them are going to be extremely chalky. I also think it makes a lot of sense to take John Rahm. Said it before. I think he has a really solid round in him. Yesterday was a little bit of an enigma, both for him and Justin Thomas. And I expect them both, if not one of them, to rebound it in big ways. So this is going to be our big three, those three chalky options that I said I was going to be willing to take. And you can see that leaves us with $7,100 remaining per player. So what we need to do now is first off, make sure we're taking guys that are, let's say, below 15% ownership, but also taking guys that have a relatively high chance at cracking the top 10. I'd be willing to take one guy that's a pure flyer play, but outside of that, we want to make sure we're taking guys with high-end upside. Let's go ahead and show you what a Sepp Straka build would look like, because again, Straka going to be in the single digit owned. He's not going to be like 20, 25% owned today, even though he's starting at 13 under par. He could be a clear first man in. He's clearly the cheapest of any of these guys at the top end of the range. The next comparable guy would be a guy like Bill Haas. You'd have to go a little bit further down the board to get anyone else. You know, Taylor Montgomery. He's a new player on tour. Pretty much don't know anything about him. Of course, Bill Haas, he's getting up there in age. He's not necessarily the longest hitter on tour. Sepp Straka, just a much better course fit here. So I'm going to go ahead and plug him in there. If we use Sepp Straka, it also gives us a little bit more salary. So if I wanted to take another chalky option, we could take an Aaron Rye, but somebody perhaps just a little bit more fitting for this lineup. Let's see. We can go to Taylor Pendrith. That would make a lot of sense. Go to Pat Perez. That'd be a good way to leave some salary on the table. Let's see what Mav McNeely looks like. So if we put McNeely in here, if you guys remember, McNeely wasn't chalk. He was right around like 15 to, I believe, 12 to 15% owned over there. That leaves us $6,800. Then we could take Pat Perez. Perfect. Yeah, $6,700. This type of lineup, because we're taking Pat Perez, who's sub 5%, because we're taking Sepp Straka, who's sub 15%, and because McNeely's not super chalk like these top three options, this, despite having these three mega chalk guys, has a good chance of being unique. So this is what we're looking for in a large field GPP. We're still taking guys with relatively high projections. Again, the guy starting the lowest on the board here is T19, right? So it's not like he's starting very far back. I believe Pat Perez is 5 strokes off the lead too, right? So if he goes out there, has a really solid day, could end up winning this golf tournament. Like I said, it's not outside the realm of possibility. So that's how I'm going to be handling some of these GPP type of contests. Let's go ahead and make a cash build now. Show you guys what I was talking about with taking up. What's going on? What's going on, Isaiah? We gotta get on one of those course pods again one of these days too. Hit me up on Instagram when you do that, man. And yeah, hit me up with the Fantasy Golf League too. And we should open it up to maybe some more people. So maybe some of the people on your Instagram page can join it. Some of the people here on YouTube can as well. We can make it like a whole ass league. That sounds like a lot of fun. Let me know if you want to do that on Instagram. That'd be pretty cool. All right, let's do a cash build now. So if you're in cash, guys, John Rahm is the guy that you pretty much have to be taking. Will Zalatoris is going to be chalk as well. I think it makes a lot of sense. Jason Day, Aaron Rye, probably also somebody you should be taking in your cash contest. And now we have $7,000 remaining per player. And if we're trying to take the optimal plays for cash, you can see we obviously can't afford any of these guys above $8,000. That's not going to be fit, not going to be doable. Sepp Straka, you mentioned him as a potential option. I'm just trying to give you guys a little bit of a different looking build this time around. I guess it might be Sepp Straka. Sepp Straka might be higher round than I'm expecting, because you guys can see there wasn't really like a logical next man in there. Let me go ahead and show you what I'm talking about. And my algorithm doesn't necessarily take this into consideration. Always is like the pricing algorithm, right? It's particularly when we're sorting it by score. You guys can see what I'm looking at here. We have $7,000 remaining per player, right? It's not like we took anyone that was crazy expensive. And the only guy we can really take here that makes any sense would be a Straka, a Haas, or Pat Perez down here, right? And I don't expect many people to go to Pat Perez. I don't expect many people to take Montgomery. And to get down here to 8-7 under, I don't expect that to be relatively popular either. So we might be looking at a slightly more owned Sepp Straka than I was expecting. So keep that in mind when ownership comes out a little bit later on. Might see him closer to 10, 15, maybe 20% owned. But for cash contests, that would be advantageous, right? That would actually make him slightly better play there. If we end up doing that, we have $7,700 remaining per player. Wouldn't mind going to Peter Malnati. Wouldn't mind going to Adam Schenk either. Schenk would probably be the one that I would prefer there. Cameron Young, that way you would be leaving $700 on the table. So even though he's starting in 8th place, in theory should be chalkier, probably wouldn't be, just because, again, you're leaving salary on the table. But that would make a whole lot of sense for cash, right? This type of lineup, you don't even have to take a Sepp Straka if you take somebody like a Cameron Young. Actually, yeah, you do. You see, this is the point, guys, right? Even if you take Cameron Young here, there's no logical next man in, right? You miss off on Taylor Pendrith by $100, so on and so forth. So unless you spent down from one of these options, I kind of cornered you in the Sepp Straka. That's interesting. That's why I like taking around with doing these hand builds, is because sometimes you can find some of these ownership spots that you're forced into, that when you're running 150 lineups that you're not really keen to, right? Typically I'm just running my optimizers. I'm not doing a lot of hand building. Sometimes you miss out on those type of things. So that's an interesting little aside there. Cool. That's all I've got for today, guys. Hopefully you guys are a little bit more informed for your single round slate. If you guys have any questions and you're watching this on replay, do not be shy. Go ahead and let me know down in the chat. We are going to be doing Showdown streams for next week as well. Of course, our regular DFS content, that'll be for the Pebble Beach Pro-Am, which, yes, it's another Pro-Am, another course with multiple golf courses. So maybe that excites you guys. Maybe that gives you guys a headache. Either way, though, I'll be here to break it down for y'all to make it a little bit more simple for your research process. Good luck with all of your lineups for today, and let's get this cash, guys.